Yo, what's going on, everybody, and welcome into another episode of Till Mets Do Us Part here live on Twitter, live on YouTube, like we are each and every single week. Only this time we are doing an all East Coast edition. John Sapanaro out in Staten Island, New York. Matt Ibby Ibanez back in New Jersey. Ibby, we are just a small bridge away from each other, which is a lot closer than we usually are when we do this show. I'm back on the East Coast. The winter meetings are on the West Coast, and I got to be honest, the weather here sucks, and I want to go back.
Yeah, the weather is not the greatest right now. It's freezing one day, it's decent the next or whatever, but as always, dreary, cold, whatever. But finally, the last couple of weeks we've been trying to just pull anything we possibly could in terms of creating content to keep the show going. And then finally, with a fury starting on that Friday night, the stove was turned all the way up to whatever the highest degree it could possibly go, and it hasn't stopped since. Not only for our Mets, but for baseball in general. A lot of money is being tossed around. It's exciting times for a lot of teams, but especially our Mets. Now, I don't know where you want to start exactly, because there is a whole slew of emotions to talk about. Happiness, the punch to the gut we'll talk about, I'm sure. But where exactly do you want to start on this very fun-filled, information-packed episode of TM Dup?
I think we have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is, of course, the Mets deciding to re-up with their replay guy. Harrison Glazer, I believe, is his name. That's the most important news that's happened in Mets land or baseball land. No, actually, that is kind of important because he's basically the best in the biz, but that is not where we're going to talk. That's where we would have stayed if things were remaining the cold stove season. But fortunately for us, a lot of things have happened. Look, we got to let's go chronologically as best we can, and of course, everybody watching this live, your comments, your questions, all that stuff comes in real time, especially on YouTube. So stay active. And if you're not watching us live, you can catch the replay as soon as we're done over on our YouTube channel, which is called Till Mets Do Us Part. Or, of course, you can listen to us starting tomorrow, courtesy of the Chop Sports Network, wherever it is you get your podcast. Ibby, your thoughts now that you've had a couple of days to reflect. And, of course, the Mets were able to react to Jacob deGrom deciding to leave for the Texas Rangers.
Well, I'll give you a quick backstory, you as well as the viewers. I was downstairs where I am right now, and I mentioned on the show last week that I was thinking about changing things up, better presentation for us, for the show moving forward. And I was measuring things, getting things all together, and then I get a text message. And who's it from? My partner, John Sapanaro. He sends me a text. I look down, and I see, Jacob, it says deGrom, Rangers, 5/185. I sat down. I was supposed to be doing work, getting things done down here like I wanted to. And I kind of just sat there for like a good half hour as I was scrolling Twitter or whatever and just reading everything. And, initially, and you put out a video, I put out a video shortly afterwards, just some quick thoughts that we want to put out since we weren't recording. All the good stuff happens as soon as we're done recording. But point being, in that moment, it was a gut punch. It didn't feel great because you didn't know what was next. You had ideas of where you could go, but you didn't want to talk about those things. You didn't want to think about those things. It was just, you had your guy. You thought he was going to be a Met for life. We talked about legacy. We talked about him being a Met for life or whatever. And it didn't happen. So in that moment, it sucked because it was like, man, that was our guy. We thought he would be here. And the point that I made in the video that I put out was simply, you had a guy here for the worst of times, a little bit of good, you think about 2015, but for the most part, he was a superstar pitcher on a very bad team that brought those teams up because he was appointment television. And you thought he would have been here with the turnaround with Steve Cohen here, giving him the money, winning, potentially taking home a championship at some point. You thought that was the future, and that wasn't the case. And he's gone. And honestly, and I'm being 100% serious here, in that moment, that night going to bed, like, it sucked. I woke up the next day. I was ready for the next. I was ready for what was to come, mainly because I trust the people that are spending the money for this team. And I was ready for the next player, whoever it may have been. We'll talk about who it was, obviously, in the end. But I was ready to move on and stop, being, down and out and sour over things. There was a lot to be done. And sure enough, things have really kicked into gear and things are getting done. So in that moment, sucked, gut punch, but shortly afterwards, after a nice 8 hours of sleep, rarely do I ever get 8 hours of sleep, but after 8 hours of sleep, I felt fine and ready to move on.
Listen, you needed it. I'm going to jump into the comments real quick. What up to Carlos, who's here more often than not. And then we've got a first-time watcher, and I want to say it's Wiseman. Yeah, that's it. Wiseman, a 1238 saying, first time watching live. Welcome to the broadcast. Regular podcast listener. Thank you for that. Really hope we can get Senga done. Intriguing upside. Would rather go that way versus Bassett for 5 more years. And we're going to talk about that in depth coming up in a little bit. Yeah. But that echoes everything I've been tweeting about over the last couple of days. I completely agree with you. Wiseman in name, not only in name, I should say. Look, we both put out reaction videos when the Jacob deGrom stuff happened. And Ibby, I got to be honest with you. I'm not saying that I didn't care. That would be callous. That would be wrong. I'd be lying to you. Obviously, I care. Jacob deGrom should have been a legacy Met. But I will say this. I believe that Jacob deGrom's legacy is intact. I don't think his legacy is tarnished. I think what he did here and what he gave to us, whether it's the Cy Youngs, whether it's the rookie year, whether it's the big start against the Yankees, whether it was being a Bulldog in the 2015 playoffs, all of that stuff, I think that legacy will not go away. I think the sad part is that he didn't see the need to kind of continue that legacy here with the Mets, and he chose to go a different route. Now, look, you want to take care of your family. You want to go to a place. You do whatever you want to do. You do whatever works for you. I have no beef with that. And everybody who listens to this and watches us, and you and I are on the same page here. You're a player. You get as much money as you can get whenever you can get it. So I don't begrudge him for taking the money. I will never begrudge a player for taking the money. My sentiment has not changed from the stuff that I posted in that immediate reaction video. If the Mets make a $40 million in AAV offer, that means that offer is legit. That means that offer is real. That means they want you. And whether or not you can get more money or more years from somebody else, you would think that playing in the ballpark of $40 million, which would put you at like the 3rd or 4th highest average annual value in the history of Major League Baseball, that shows a willingness that the team will at least listen and play ball and work with you. The fact that he didn't come back to them, to me, what takes all the sting out of it. It means he didn't want to be here. I said it in the instant reaction video, and I say it now. And for me, I'm not concerned anymore. Like, I don't know. It's not that I got over it really quickly, but I kind of did, because that says it all. And the one thing I will really kind of dump on deGrom for is the whole committed to winning. Now, I know that's what people say. Oh, yeah. And I appreciate the fact that Texas is committed to trying to be better. They're spending a lot of money. They did last year. They're spending a lot of money with deGrom. It looks like they're going to continue to spend money and try to turn that franchise around. And when you look at the Pirates and the Rays signing the biggest free agent deals for like $40 total million in their franchise history, that's a joke. Spend money. I love to see other teams spend money. All that stuff is great. But to go from a 101 win team to a team that barely won that many games in the last 2 years combined is not you being a committed to winning player for a committed to winning franchise. I know that's what you want to say, and they're probably going to be improved, or at least they should be. But Ibby, they finished behind the Angels. Do you know how hard it is to finish behind the Angels last year? They were terrible. That's how bad the Texas Rangers were. So for me, goodbye, so long. At some point, we will celebrate the career of Jacob deGrom with the Mets and all the great things he did. I'm sure at one point he'll be welcomed back, and he'll be at Old Timers Day and all that stuff. But I really I don't wish him poorly. I just don't care. No. I don't care about him.
Yeah, I mean, once somebody leaves, again, it's always about what's on the front of the jersey. Like, you're rooting for the team, you're rooting for the franchise. That's what you fell in love with. Of course, we fall in love with players when they're here, but for the most part, you're rooting for the team, you're rooting for the city, whatever it may be. And he's no longer here. You tip your cap, you say goodbye. To what you said before, it's 100% true. And that's, when it comes to his legacy, nothing is changing in terms of what he's done here. It's intact. Look, we can talk about the fact that for someone that was here for a shorter period of time, forever being loved and not even providing what Jake did. You could talk about a guy that you sat on a panel with at the QVC, Bartolo Colon, forever loved. And look, he has his own little niche, following and love and legacy as a Met. But Jacob deGrom provided so much in terms of in terms of, like I said, being appointment television for a team that was awful. As you can see here on the slide, 2-time Cy Young winner, Rookie of the Year, 4-time All-Star, NL ERA leader, K leader for 2 years. Like, he was extremely special. He was, and I wish him all the best. But he's no longer here. He didn't want to come back, and it shows based off of the information that came out. And if there's one thing I will say that I don't like, and again, this isn't me putting ill will towards Jake at all. It's more so the fact that I hate when people leave, and this is more so the media, and it's always me crapping on the media because I can't stand it. But the fact that the second the guy leaves, and this is anybody, specifically in New York, all these stories come out where it's like, oh, it was this and this, and everyone just piles on and piles on and piles on. And it's like, well, if any of this was true, I would have thought that some of it would have come out over, I don't know, the last couple of years, maybe would have come up during this free agency period, but it never did. It conveniently comes out the second the guy leaves. I don't like stuff like that. I didn't like the wording from the likes of Joel Sherman and John Heyman when it came to the things that they were saying. I didn't think it was proper. I look, the guy left.
Man, they were acting like real snakes in the grass.
The guy left. Look, you're upset because he never gave you anything. He wasn't a guy that really talked to the media. He kind of dipped and dodged out of his way, stuff like that. Look, it happens. He's gone. It's over. Let it go. You move on. You're right for the team. You're moving on with the new things, and there's plenty to talk about. And there's a lot of change going on with this team. The guy's no longer here. It no longer needs to be a story. I'm done. It's over. Thank you, Jake. I'm not putting you down. I'm not going to boo you. I'm not like these people who are rooting for injuries. Nothing like that. Best of luck out in Texas. It's better for him to be out in the AL West as opposed to being in the NL East.
Yeah, man. Look, you've said it. Time to move on. We reacted to it in the moment. For everybody who doesn't follow us on social, and you should, at Till Mets Do Us Part, by the way, or you can look at our handles at the bottom of the screen while you're watching us live. You can follow us individually as well. We hope that you do across all the platforms on Instagram, Twitter, and all those things. It is time to move on. And Stevie Mac says it. Look, it's time to move on. Jake is already an afterthought. Since he didn't want to be here, and Uncle Stevie helped that even more by signing the reigning Cy Young winner. So let's go to that next before we say hello to Baseball and Barbecue, who was over at the QBC as well. And he kind of just says this, and we'll give him the final thought on this. And, the year DeGrom kept saying how much he loved pitching at Citi Field and how cool it would be to stay with one team, loves pitching in front of these fans, yada, yada. Why say all that? I think because honestly, Ibby, he wanted to keep the door open. I think he wanted to, I don't think the Mets and Jake had a conversation in July where they were like, we're not doing this. You're not coming back. I think it just kind of was a situation where, if the Mets would have given him $585 or $590, which was the thing he supposedly asked for in spring training, I think he would have come back. I think money would have talked. I think if he got the highest deal or the most years from the Mets, that he probably would have come back. I think that there's something to be said about him not having the Mets have a chance to counteroffer, so he wouldn't have to necessarily walk away from the higher deal if that's where his heart was, or maybe he knew that the Mets weren't going to play in that realm. Either way, Jacob deGrom is gone, and that brings us to our next big topic of the day, and that is, of course, Justin Verlander is now a New York Met. And if you look at the career highlights from the last slide, and look, DeGrom has been absolutely fantastic his entire career. But Ibby, I had to remake this slide to fit in all of Justin Verlander's highlights. MVP, 3-time Cy Young, Rookie of the Year, 9-time All-Star, pitching Triple Crown, 2 World Series, ALCS MVP. The list goes on and on and on. Your initial reactions to the signing of Justin Verlander to pair with his former teammate and fellow AARP member, Max Scherzer.
Look, I'm always 100% honest when it comes to talking on this show. And honestly, the second it was being talked about and it started becoming more and more like it was going to happen, the first thing is, you think of guys 40, pairing up with the guy who's 38. The one thing it does show, though, it's like no matter what, this team is all in. It doesn't matter. And you think about it in the sense of the guy just won the AL Cy Young. He pitched incredible. He's coming off of a World Series. Yes, we know he didn't pitch well in the World Series. Yes, we know he doesn't do well when he's in the World Series. But hell, if he gets me to a World Series, gives me a shot, I'm all about it. Okay. So I was very excited because when you look at it, I know a lot of people automatically say, well, it's just replacing one with another. You're not making your team better. Yeah, I don't think people realize that Jake only pitched 11 starts last year and won 6 games. That's the huge difference. If this guy can stay healthy and he's been treating his body properly, he's going to offer a lot to this team. And I honestly, the thing that I love the most about it is, the initial story that came out, it's like, oh, well, I heard that Verlander and Scherzer don't like each other back when they were in Detroit. It's like they were just two extreme alphas that were trying to go out there every single day to outcompete with one another. And you know what? I love having the idea of two bulldogs on the mound back-to-back days and just trying to do one better than the other. They're close when it comes to the all-time strikeout list. So it's like it's history almost every night when it comes to climbing up those ranks. Look, I'm pumped up about it, mainly because this is a guy that no matter what has prided himself his entire career on being out there, being on the mound, wanting the ball, doing anything he can. And to copy a former guest of the show, Jake Brown, the idea of hearing Till I Collapse during the playoffs on a cold night at City, I think is freaking awesome. I hope it happens. And, I'm pumped up and let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah, shout out to Jake Brown, by the way, also a guest over at the QBC. I got to hang out with him again. I hadn't seen him since, I think, the Super Bowl when he was out in Los Angeles. Got to chop it up with Nelson Figueroa as well, his partner over at Amazing Mets Pod. And also shout out to Joe DeMeo and Connor Rogers over at the Mets Pod, which is the official SNY podcast of the New York Mets. They were great as well. Hopefully we're going to do some stuff, with the 4 of them at some point on this show. So if you like their content and you like our content, we're probably going to try to overlap with both of them. We've had Joe DeMeo on. We've had Jake Brown on separately. I think we're going to have each one of those podcasts on our show at some time in the near future. So, kind of be in tune for that. Baseball and BBQ says Verlander was great at 39, 17-5, 1.75 ERA. Why do these trolls think he will stink? Because he had another birthday. And that comes obviously with the Cy Young, his 3rd Cy Young. And look, Ibby, that's the thing. I joked about the AARP stuff and, but for me, I love the move. And I think, it's why I titled the episode what I titled it, Dealing Aces. The Mets lost an ace and they rebounded immediately 24 hours or 36 hours later by signing Justin Verlander. It seemed like it was a foregone conclusion for a lot of the people, like, oh, it's an easy pivot, but that doesn't mean it's going to get done. It doesn't mean Verlander wanted to be here the same way people thought, hey, maybe Scherzer didn't want to be here last year. People in the media floating that out. Look, obviously money talks, but the Mets' willingness to be competitive, be in the mix, and chase this thing down and hunt a World Series and hunt trying to be the best team they possibly can is what is attractive to these alpha competitors like Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. That's ultimately why I thought Jacob deGrom would come back. I thought he was that same type of person, and I think in a way he is, but I also think he had other things on his mind. Look, Justin Verlander has done everything you could possibly do. Also, he's with Kate Upton. Maybe he wanted to be in New York. You can't take the family aspect out of it for DeGrom or for Verlander when you're talking about the family aspect for a guy like DeGrom. So I love the signing. And the thing is, and this is not revisionist history. This is not looking at it as a Monday morning quarterback. I think objectively that the Mets are better off signing Justin Verlander to a 2-year deal than they would be signing Jacob deGrom to a 5-year deal. That is legacy aside, just from a baseball perspective. And a lot of people argued with me on that. People were saying things like, I don't understand why they would pony up, for a 40-year-old guy, all this money when they wouldn't go 5 years for deGrom, who was a lifelong Met. It's like, look, if you're going to be fair, Verlander was like the picture of health before the Tommy John injury. Now he's basically got a brand new UCL. What does he do? He comes back. He puts up the numbers that Baseball and BBQ alluded to, 17-5, 1.75 ERA. He wins the Cy Young, but he also pitched like 175 innings. Prior to the injury, Ibby, he was like a 200-inning guy, so he wasn't far off of his pace. He had a great season all told. And then on the flip side, you're looking at deGrom, who we all loved, but deGrom barely pitched for the last 2 years. So if I'm going to invest huge money into a guy over the course of X amount of years, give me 2 for Verlander versus 5 for deGrom. Sorry.
And if there's one thing I can throw in, it's the fact that It's this is kind of me calling out Evan Roberts in a sense where he's still very angry over the fact that the Mets didn't offer the most money in comparison to the guys that they end up signing, meaning on the per year basis by offering Jake only 40 and giving Max and Verlander 43. And to that, I basically say, well, if Jake, knowing that he's had the recent injuries, it's not as if they didn't offer Jake a damn good deal. They paid him to pitch years 34, 35, and 36, $120 million. That would have been the offer, right?
And now, this is not the offer the Mets made to Vladimir Guerrero where it wasn't even in the ballpark of something that would get done. Yeah.
So you get $40 million a year for the age 34, 35, 36. Now, based off of what's been going on in baseball, specifically with the Mets and older pitchers that have proven to be I'll call them mercenaries, if you will, like Scherzer, like Verlander in this sense. He could have easily cashed in two more times. If he believed, number one, he wanted to be here, and number two, if he believed in his own personal health when it comes to his arm and his body. But he opted for the years. And look, the biggest thing that people need to understand, when teams are paying out players, be it in New York or California, there's a lot when it comes to taxes. And I'm telling you, it plays a role in anything. So that's why you see guys when they have when they retire and they're done, they live in Florida or they're living in Texas or they want to sign.
Oh, I know. I live in California.
It's a real thing. It's like 13% or whatever it is.
Yeah,
like
it's
something
absurd.
Crazy.
Highest tax state in the country.
So point is, the guy hit the lottery. He hit the lottery. It's the fact that the Mets, and to bring it back to your point, and the last thing I'll say on that point is the fact that he had an opportunity to basically say, you're going to give me $185 million, and if I am healthy, it can go up to $220 million over 6 years in a state that's non-taxed. It's like, I just hit the lottery. He knew that the Mets weren't going to go there. They probably drew the line in sand, probably like 135. That's what they wanted to go, and that would have been it. And it's just like, okay, you got your money, you go, and that's it. You're on to the next. And I'm with you. It makes sense for how they've been building, for how they can eventually build up that sustainability and keeping their own as well, because these guys are on shorter term deals and it's going to free up money later on. It gives you the opportunity to win now while also being able to pay and keep the guys that you have later on so that you can continue building as you try to get to that model of consistency.
I want to jump back into the comments. We got a lot flooding in. We haven't talked about it too much. I thought before all the stuff happened, Baseball and BBQ says, great meeting John at the QBC, Ibby, next year. And for everybody who's watching this and listening to this tomorrow, the QBC is a great event. It's basically the Mets full-on fan fest. I hosted it this past week. I hosted it last year as well. It's why I'm in New York right now. It's absolutely excellent. If you haven't been to one, you definitely should go. I wanted to talk more about it, but we've just got such a jam-packed episode. Maybe in a couple weeks, if things slow down, we can kind of recap a little bit about what went down, even though it'll be older news, but I think that's important to do. Carlos Ramos saying, it means we have done our due diligence and we were ready to move on with the plan with or without Jake. That is with regards to signing Justin Verlander as quickly as they did. And, it's funny, Ibby, because a lot of things were made of Jake, and you mentioned some of the things and how you thought some of the stuff that's been said about him is unfair. But Stevie Mack brings up a good comment. He says Verlander is an actual leader as well, something DeGrom wanted no part of. That's something that is being reported. I think it's probably a little bit overblown because I think DeGrom was a leader in a
different
sense.
Types of leaders.
But yeah, I do think he was a different type of leader. I think you saw Scherzer sort of look, Scherzer helped that rotation. Everybody
Absolutely.
Jokes about teaching DeGrom to throw the first pitch curveball and all that stuff. But you saw other people do it. You saw Taijuan Walker do it with success. You saw Cookie Carrasco do it with success. You saw Chris Bassett do it with success. So I think a lot of that came from Scherzer. I think Scherzer even showed DeGrom some things. And then I think DeGrom jumped in the mix and was also helpful. But also DeGrom missed the entire first part of the season, so he wasn't able to do it. And he was out there, Scherzer was out there on an island a bit. I think when you flip the script now and you look at Verlander, I think that Verlander and Scherzer are very, very similar kinds of people. And I think, like you said, they're not only going to push each other, I think they're going to push whoever is on the rest of the rotation. We'll talk about Kodai Senga coming up in a little bit, but I think that is maybe one of, if not the biggest reasons to want to sign Senga. And you've got a special guest joining you here. One of the biggest reasons to want to sign Senga is the other two guys in the rotation and what they could do. But what do you make of Verlander being a better leader for this pitching staff than DeGrom was?
I think, look, whenever I see things like that being said, it's like I said before, it's different types of leaders. And obviously, Justin Verlander is well-traveled throughout this game. The career that he's had is incredible. So having that on your staff, I think, is very special and is very beneficial. But, to someone like Jake, look, I've played on teams with guys that are extremely talented, and not to the level of Jake, but the point being, for that given team, like being that talented, and they weren't like the biggest of talkers. They weren't the biggest of rah-rah guys. They weren't the ones that were, leading the huddle or whatever it may be. It was never like that. It would just be like, this is how I go about my business. If you want to do it, you can do it. If you don't, you don't have to, but this is what I do. And I kind of feel like that's what Jake was. And it's not to say that, that he's bad at what he does. It's just, there's different types of leaders. And I think depending on the team that you have, the leader, how a leader chooses to act kind of carries on the identity for a given team. So when you have someone like a Max, I think we talked about this like once Max was signed, when you bring in someone like Max, it was going to bring out a lot more of the team because he carries himself a different way, that championship mentality, being there, winning it, all that stuff. So when that plays against Jake, the whole idea then becomes, well, it just seems like Max is a better leader, because whenever you have somebody that is more demonstrative, that is louder, you have you can have two smart kids in a classroom, and then one's more loud, one's more talkative than the other. Everyone just assumes, well, that kid knows everything. Well, it's like, well, the kid over there is doing the same exact thing. He's just not as talkative about it. He's still doing a great job, though. It's like, it's little things like that. So not to take anything away from Jake, just two different types of people, him and Max, and obviously him and Verlander. But no matter what, the plethora of knowledge that's going to be a part of the staff, however it finishes out, is going to be special, and I think it's going to lead to more success.
And Baseball and BBQ echoing what you said earlier with some of the hardline stats, saying Scherzer and Verlander are 12th and 13th on the all-time strikeout list. I think they're only 5 Ks apart. Should be fun watching them try to outdo each other all season, which is something you mentioned a bit earlier. And then Carlos saying, I give Verlander a bit of a lead over Max just because of Kate Upton. And I think that's as good a commentary as you could possibly have on a show all about baseball. People say baseball's boring. Baseball's not boring as long as Kate Upton is a part of it. So look, maybe there's a few different places we can go from here, because there's a lot I want to talk about. I think we'll save the second half for the time that you and I first have our big fight here on the show. Everybody who follows us both on Twitter, I think, assumes that they know what it's going to be about. So I think we should just round out the first half here talking about the rotation, and then kind of segue into what might come next. So we can't round out talking about the rotation without bringing up the big signing the Mets made today, which is Jose Quintana, 2 years, $26 million. You look at his 2022 season, the ERA speaks for itself. The FIP, the one that jumps out to me is the home runs per 9, which was first in the NL. Look, Jose Quintana was a really good pitcher for a really long time, and then all of a sudden he had like a terrible 2021 season, I believe it was, and everybody was like, what happened to this guy? He fell off a cliff. He's garbage. When you look at some of the money that some of the people that the Mets were supposedly interested in, especially after Jake, like Taijuan Walker bringing him back, which at first didn't seem like they were going to do. And then you look at guys like Jameson Taillon. I think getting Jose Quintana for 2 years, $13 million a year is a steal. I would rather have Quintana, who I think is on par with Taillon and Walker in terms of the same quality of pitcher. I'd rather have him for that contract for either one of those other guys for the contracts they signed. And again, I'm not saying they didn't earn that money or they don't deserve it. I think everybody should get every dollar amount. It's just where I want my team to spend their money. I think this deal for Jose Quintana, such better value than either of those other two guys, especially.
The fact that they got him for the money that they did, like you said, in comparison to what the market was clearly showing, 1,000%. I'm very happy with the signing as the back end, because look, everyone was freaking out yesterday because I had some guy in my mentions yelling at me or whatever. I tried to pull a Sapanero fight back, so I'm learning from you a little bit here and there. But
don't do it. It's not worth it. I get into fights and I wind up telling people go cry in a corner. It gets because they get mad. They get rude with me, man. They're like, you're a failed comic. I'm like, you don't even know me, man. Shut up. Don't
But
do it. That's not worth it. It's not worth it.
but main point is, in terms of the money, look, I was shocked, legit shocked when I saw the numbers for Walker. I liked Walker while he was here, but I didn't think he was going to get that much money. And I thought that Taillon was going to match him or just, either go a little bit above or a little bit below. And he goes a little bit below. So the fact that they get a talent like Quintana, look, he's not a world beater. He's not the greatest thing since sliced bread. Look, he's going to fit in fine on the back end. And people are saying, well, how's this team going to fill out the rotation? How they're falling behind. They're doing this. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. Phillies are doing this. Oh, all these guys are signing everywhere. It's like, well, wait a minute. I just replaced DeGrom with Verlander. I just replaced Walker with Quintana, and now I'm potentially going to replace Bassett or retain Bassett, however this goes. But I'm going to potentially replace Bassett with the likes of Kodai Senga. So it's like this team is positioning itself properly while also bringing back Carlos Carrasco, thus pushing down the likes of Peterson and McGill and the like of that to being more depth fill-in spots or long guys, swing guys in the bullpen. So, it's a contract that makes all the sense in the world, and it helps you in other areas to spend money. We talk about it all the time, money allocation. He has all the money in the world. We know that. Mets Twitter, he's not going to give you $25 million players at every single position. I know you want things. I want things too. I really do. But understand, you're not going to get a superstar everywhere. This is about team building. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. First of all, a couple of the comments. Basically, everybody agrees with us so far. Baseball and BBQ. Jose Quintana, a nice pickup, nice back of the rotation pickup. Carlos saying, yes, John Quintana also lets us know that Senga is next. We'll talk about that next in the second half. And then my favorite comment on the matter, Stevie Mack, I didn't like the move at first, but then I realized I confused him with another player. Sorry, Jose. Solid move if he's a number 4 replacement for Walker, which I think is exactly what he is. That's what you said. That's what I said. It's funny because I think that Quintana is the kind of player that the Mets needed to round out the rotation. I like Peterson. I don't love him. I like McGill a lot. I like him a bit more than I like Peterson. But when you look at the Mets pitching depth, and we talked about it last week when we were talking about the top 15 prospects according to MLB Pipeline, not a lot of pitchers on that list. Certainly not a lot of pitchers near the top. As a matter of fact, their highest ranked pitcher in that list was Jose Butto, who pitched last year and was probably a little bit early in his baseball life to be pitching in the bigs, a little bit rushed out of necessity, didn't look good. And so the Mets need depth. Look, you're going to have Joey Lucchesi, but who knows what he's going to give you, right? Joey Fuego, you're not 100% sure, coming off the injuries, all that stuff. I'd rather have McGill and the Churve. I'd rather have McGill and Peterson battle it out for the 5th or 6th spot than be guaranteed locks in the rotation, because you're going to need 6, 7, 8 pitchers over the course of a season. I also think the way Max broke down at the end, I know he wasn't healthy, but Max's age and Verlander's age, you want to make sure that these guys aren't forced to be Bulldogs for the entire season, the way that they have been in the past. Look, when you get to June, July, and August, I'm not saying you go to a 6-man rotation strictly. I'm saying you skip a start. I'm saying you keep guys fresh. I want their 40-year-old bodies to be as fresh as possible for a playoff run so that we don't run into what we did this year, where it looked like Max was still hurt but had to pitch through it, where it looked like Bassett hit a little bit of a wall, and it looked like DeGrom was in that little phase of like, oh, right after spring training where I'm a little bit not fully in sync, but that phase of the year for him was September and the playoffs, which wasn't exactly the best time for him to hit a wall. So I like the addition of pitchers. I think they need one more. Ibby, if it were me, it is Senga. I like Bassett. I thought Bassett should have been moved on from 2 weeks ago when I thought the machinations of this offseason were going to be different. Now, with the people who are available, I would easily take Bassett back. However, I like Senga for his upside. I like Senga for his unfamiliarity with the league, or the league's unfamiliarity with him, I should say. I also like the fact that he doesn't have the pressure of coming in here and being an ace if they were to sign him. And not only that, he doesn't even have to be the number 2. And he gets to look up and watch 2 of the greatest pitchers to ever do it and learn from those 2 guys as he grows into being a pitcher here in the States. There's a lot of reasons to like him. Plus, there's no posting fee for him because he's an international free agent, and there's no qualifying offer to him because he's an international free agent. So when you take all of those things, money being equal, give me Senga for 5 or 6 years over giving me Bassett for the same stretch of time. That's my feeling.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is, it's like I was saying before, when it comes to roster construction and seeing how this is going to be an older staff. Look, I think it would be wiser. And I want to make a point that I'm not trying to contradict myself from what I said previously about not knowing much about Senga. It's more so the fact that when you're building like the way that they are, I think you have to get younger somewhere. He's 29 in comparison to Bassett's 33. So if you're going to pay a 5 or potentially 6-year deal offer in terms of how this team is building, I think it makes more sense to go with the younger guy there because, who knows what Bassett could be by the time he reaches the age of 38? You don't even know. So, in comparison to a guy who's 29, giving a 5-year deal, putting him up to 35. So it's like, I would rather go that route. And for the main reason you just said before too, it's the fact that he wouldn't have to be an ace. He would have expectations on him, but when you have Max and Verlander in front of you, it kind of takes away from that, maybe that early learning curve that he might go through. It kind of softens the blow, if you will, if he needs a little bit of time. But I'm with you. I think he makes sense, and I do believe that is the route that they're going to go.
I think so too, and it's funny. Ant Rivera from Subway to Shea, we've shout out so many other Mets content creators so far in the show, as we should. He's great, and I was just on his show last week previewing the Queens Baseball Convention. When I said the thing about no pressure and stuff like that, he was like, "No pressure, pitching in Queens as an international free agent coming over here getting $100 million or whatever." And I was like, "No. I said he wouldn't have the pressure of being an ace. I'm not saying he'd have no pressure on him.
Right.
Obviously, there would be pressure, just no pressure of having to be an ace." Stevie Mac throwing something out there that some people have said that he is supposedly making his decision tonight. It's said that he was going to hold out. He was going to kind of wait for the best decision. The Mets are very much in on him based on all the reports. I'm refreshing Twitter constantly. Haven't seen anything that contradicts this. So, and then Carlos Ramos, very confident he's on his way to Queens. Ibby, one thing is for sure.
Well.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the agency talk as well when it comes to the representation between Quintana and Senga. The idea of eliminating a big fish by allowing your quote unquote lesser arm, with obviously you want to get your clients paid, but the idea of Quintana eliminating the Mets from Senga when they're represented by the same people, I don't think makes a lot of sense. I think it makes more sense where it's like they're going to sign this guy because they already know that they're going to be all in trying to get Senga as well. So they're just going to double dip with that group and get both pitchers as opposed to taking the lesser of the two, if you will, and eliminate themselves from being a player for a big international star.
I agree with that completely. And, that kind of leads us to our next topic is where do the Mets go from here? Obviously, they have a lot of avenues, and I think now's a good time, a little over 30 minutes, 38 minutes to be exact. We'll take our quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk about where we want the Mets to go throughout not only the rest of the week here in the winter meetings, but also throughout the rest of the offseason. Things tend to be pretty busy right up until Christmas. And then, yes, Ivy and I will bare-knuckle box right here on StreamYard virtually over the hottest, most contested thing that he and I will disagree on. It has to do with the far-reaching plans of our New York Mets. If you've never watched this live before, don't worry. It is just a quick 10-second ad spot that we need for our audio podcast. This is Till Mets Do Us Part. We'll be right back. Yo, just like that, we are back. Welcome back to Till Mets Do Us Part, here live on Twitter, live on YouTube. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez. And of course, if you're not watching us live, which a lot of you are, and super active in the comments. And I also saw we did a lot of you guys retweeting, hey, they're going live soon and all that stuff. We really, really appreciate that. It has helped us grow. So thank you so much for being active, not only with the show, but about the show. But of course, if you can't watch us live, like one of our commenters said earlier, Wise Man, you can listen to the podcast tomorrow morning, courtesy of the Chop Sports Network, wherever it is you get your podcast. And of course, you can watch the broadcast as soon as it ends over on our YouTube channel, which is appropriately called Till Mets Do Us Part. Follow us across all social platforms at Till Mets Do Us Part, or our respective handles that you can find right here at the bottom of the screen at John Sapanaro, at Poison_Ibby. That's where you can interact with us when we're not doing the show, which is all of the other days of the week, but this one, basically. So, Ibby, look, the Mets can go in a lot of different directions. And you mentioned that Steve Cohen, no matter how rich he is, he can't have $25 million players at every position. He can't. I mean, no one would do that. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's not good for business. It's bad for long-term growth of the team and all of that stuff. But one thing that you and I have said that almost flies in the face of that to a lot of people on Mets Twitter when they go, he can't have a $500 million payroll. And it's like, he can't, but he can have a $350 million payroll, or maybe what we're seeing over the last couple of days, a $375 million payroll, which I can't believe I'm saying that in the same breath as the Mets, right? For anybody who lived through the Wilpons. And the other thing is, he's not going to, but the Mets could have a $500 million payroll. Why could they? It's for two reasons. It's because Steve Cohen is so rich that he has an amount of money that none of us will ever see in our lifetime, and none of us can even really comprehend. Does $17 billion fit in a three-family home if you break it down in $1 bills, $100 bills, quarters? Does he dive into it like Scrooge McDuck? I have no idea. I can't even conceptualize how much money that is. The guy buys the ugliest artwork just for fun. Okay, so like this guy can do whatever he wants financially. The other part of it is sustainability, and to win the way the Mets want to win. The way the Mets are set up based on the team that Cohen inherited from the Wilpons. He's a fan. He dealt with the Wilpons. He had to see the Wilpons front and center as a minority owner. He knows that this fan base was not going to take, look, I'm worth $17 billion, but we're going to trade everybody. We're going to suck for 5 years. We're going to build the way the Astros did. They're not going to accept it, one, because of what we've been through, two, because of the amount of money everybody knows he has, three, for the reputation that he has as a fan and as a savvy, shrewd, aggressive business owner, right? So the best way to do that is to continue to build this farm system the way that they have, not trade these top prospects, get from maybe 15 or 12 where they are in farm system rankings into that top 5, 6, so that they can do what the Dodgers do in terms of roster turnover. And all of that means you spend a lot of money now. The Mets can have a $350 million payroll or a $370 million payroll now, because beyond 2024, just 2 years from now, they don't have a lot of money committed. And to me, that is the biggest thing. Here's part of the tweet chain from Anthony DiComo. The Mets have blown past the final luxury tax threshold. So Steve Cohen can keep spending on guys like Senga and Nimmo if he wants to, so long as he's willing to pay the penalties, because like I said, they have few commitments past 2024. To me, that is the most important thing about this entire landscape. The Mets can, in 2 years, be as competitive as they are right now, as good as they are right now, with a payroll that's like, I don't know, $250 million or $200 million. And nobody will sit there and go, oh my God, the Mets aren't spending any money. No, because maybe at that point, Brett Beatty will be a star. Who knows? Maybe Alvarez will be a star. And you're talking about, giving them deals or paying them through arbitration, but not paying them the way that we have to go out and get these mercenaries, the way that you so described. So for me, what they're doing right now is exactly what I would want them to do with an owner that has the amount of money that Steve Cohen has. And people have been pushing back on that on Mets Twitter, and I don't understand why or how you could do that.
Yeah, I think it's all about, and you see this with the richer owners in the game who actually spend, obviously no one to the extent of Steve Cohen's stature, but they still play that game of the ups and downs of the luxury tax and taking the penalty 1 year and then finagling it so where they have contracts and then the numbers are going to go below it, so then they're below it for the 1 year and then they can go back up, so the penalties reset. And it's a game of numbers, And for a guy that makes all of his money through numbers in the stock market as a hedge fund guy, like, and he's appoints all of his people, like, I'm all for the idea of playing that game. But yes, it makes all the sense in the world to, as long as he's willing, he can spend that money now because, it's just that penalty that he's going to be paying because you're already over it. Just keep going. Now, again, there is a limit as opposed to what that number would be. There always is. There's that
sure.
That line in the sand. Do I think that my partner's list that he always likes to put those little check marks next to, do I think it's a little pricey? Maybe it's a little pricey. As you can see, Carlos right there bringing that up. Maybe it's a little pricey. But I understand the thought process behind it because he can go beyond and spend. And look, you could do things like that and still finagle contracts and make things a certain way. Look, I get all that makes sense. So yeah, I don't understand why. To look into the comments here as well. I think it was Baseball BBQ just thinking about the Como tweet, just saying like not understanding why the trolls, they don't understand it. It's because when it comes. First of all, Twitter's not real. That's number one. Twitter is not.
It's
real.
Not. I know. That's why I got to stop fighting with people. I have to start fighting with you, apparently.
Well, it's not real. But people, no matter what, they get caught in their thoughts, and they're just going to. Sometimes people are just very hard pressed and hard headed. They're just going to say, "No, it's this. They're not doing enough. It's this. It's why they're not spending more. It's the Wilpons all over. It's like." I don't think you guys understand anything, and you're just coming across as like petulant children who want that toy that when you already have 5 other brand new toys. It's like you're building and you can amass things over time and you can continue to keep winning, which is what Steve Cohen has done his entire life, and he just keeps on winning. So yeah, it takes time, and I think, and I mentioned it a show or two ago, I said I don't think people understand, like, we were spoiled because they won 101 games, and things usually take a lot more time than that. It's not every year where you go from 70 wins to 101 wins. It's not. It usually it's a slower build. That's like 70 to 85, 85 to 90. But you had that big thing, so everyone just assumes now they're going to win 101 games every year. Look, this can be a great team, and they might win 90 games this year, and they could be an awesome team. Like, you don't know. But the whole thing is, I think people get a little bit spoiled in that aspect. But I understand wanting to spend money. It's just understanding that there are limitations, and there are limitations on the players that can be acquired.
Not according to Stevie Mack. A Kate Upton Mets calendar will pay for the Cohen tax. See, problem already solved. Great. This is why we have you in the comments, Stevie. This is top-notch thinking so far. Look, no, it's funny because I know that the wish list that I put out there that Carlos alluded to, that you mentioned, I know that it's pricey. I understand that. But fans complain all the time. Met fans, a lot of us really are not so great. Obviously, everybody who listens to our show and comments and watches, all great. You're all great. You're terrific. Me and Ibby, terrific. No, but it's Baseball and BBQ says it. Funny, fans complain when the Mets weren't spending. Now they complain that they are spending. And that's the thing. People are like, all they did was get Verlander. He just replaces DeGrom, and they just signed Edwin Diaz. Just because those, to me, Ibby, are 2 top 10 free agents. Those, to me, are the impossible task of how do you replace DeGrom? Oh, with somebody who's just as good as DeGrom, if not better, right? Like, for their careers, obviously, Verlander has the more decorated career, so let's say he's better. I don't know if he's better today, but you know what I'm saying. And then Edwin Diaz was a move, not only one they had to make, 2, a move the Wilpons never make, 3, rewarding a guy who deserved to be rewarded and a guy who wants to be here. So if you see no difference between that and the Wilpons, you're either a troll, like Baseball and BBQ said, or you're the dumbest baseball fan I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't get it. Look, again, I know that my plan is pricey. I still stand by the fact that while he's out there, I would like to go get Carlos Correa to play third base, move some things around. It's still the thing I would do. I've really talked myself into a Carlos Correa and Andrew Benintendi tandem that I think would do really, really, really well for this team. I would even revisit I wanted, at one point, I said Carlos Correa and Bellinger. Obviously, that ship has sailed. Before we came on to do this podcast, I was like, ooh, Carlos Correa and Mitch Haniger. Obviously, that ship has sailed as they've each signed somewhere else. But, dude, I would even revisit Michael Conforto on a 1-year deal $12 million, somewhere in that range. I think Bellinger got like 17.5. So if you tell me Conforto gets 12, 13, 15, something like that to reestablish value, as long as you pair him with a guy like Correa, that would still be where I'd want to go next, because I think you're getting a lot of value from two different positions. I don't think that's where the Mets will go, but I do think the Mets are going to continue to spend and spend and spend, because basically, like Giacomo said in that tweet, and like we've been talking about for 10 minutes, it behooves them to spend. There is no reason not to when you look just 2 short seasons away from now and you see, wow, things are really not locked in. They can go wherever they want. They have one long-term contract on the books right now, Francisco Lindor, and that's it. Now, we all hope that that changes, because we hope that Alonso gets signed, maybe McNeil, maybe it's Nimmo long-term. Who knows? That wouldn't be where I'd go. We'll talk about that in a minute when me and Ibby fight about it. But no, all of those things are on the table, Ibby, and it's just an exciting time to be a Mets fan where we can talk about this and it's not nonsense. And he's proved time and time again, from his first offseason with Lindor to last offseason with everything that he did, plus the addition, the icing on the cake, which was Max Scherzer, to this offseason already, going out, boom, highest deal ever for a relief pitcher for Edwin Diaz, and then boom, highest average annual value, tying the own record that you set last year for Justin Verlander. We can talk about this. Nothing's off base. I know Aaron Judge is going back to the Yankees. I know I wanted Aaron Judge. I know I said the Mets could get Aaron Judge and should. I know they're not going to. But when we talked about Aaron Judge last week and the week before that and the week before that, it was very possible. It could have happened. The Mets could have done that if they wanted to. Nothing stops them from doing that. So when the Mets make a move, it is not because of money. Now, it might not be the money they want to allocate to a player. The Jake thing may have come down to money in a sense, but it is not because of money that the Mets were like, no, thank you. They didn't walk away from Jake the way they walked away from Zach Wheeler and Jose Reyes when the Wilpons were running the team, when both of those guys came back and were like, hey, you want to match this deal? And they're basically like, no, that's it. So to me, that's the most exciting part, Ibby. And that's what a lot of these guys bring to the table. Just some, I guess, some crying with laughter emojis from Carlos and Baseball and BBQ. And then Stevie Max saying Verlander and Max are only here for a few years. Plus, we'll have a ton of dead money coming off the books once that Cano contract is done, which is at the end of this year. We haven't even talked about the concept of moving McCann, which I think is very likely, and basically turning his deal into an expiring contract by eating 11 or 12 million, whatever it is, for the one season. And then you basically have whoever gets him has McCann on a 1-year deal at a very reasonable number, even for somebody like that who sucks. So I think there's a lot of ways that they can go with this. That's all.
I need to bring something, because it has to be said. If you guys, anyone here listening in general, whether it's live or on the podcast version, if you've been with us for a while, you will know that, yes, I am the Nimmo guy. Yes, I was also the Conforto guy, okay, when he was here. John over there right now just mentioned the idea of bringing back Michael Conforto. Yes, that guy right there. That guy that said bringing back Michael Conforto. The same guy who would tell me how much he stinks, how he's got to get out. I'm not giving that guy a dime. Get him out of here. He was done with them. But I think Twitter has broken my partner so much when it comes to Brandon Nimmo that he will do anything to get him out of town. That's essentially the point that we've reached. He's doing anything. Get this guy out of here. Get that smiling goof out of here. I don't want to see him anymore. All right. I think that's kind of where you're going right now. But I will allow you to say your piece when we talk about Brandon Nimmo. I'm going to say mine as well. But yeah, I had to get that out there mainly because I was like, this guy is taking Conforto back. He hated Conforto.
Okay, here's the thing. Here's what happens with a lot of people on the Mets, okay, and Mets Twitter. This is the shortest version of this that I can give. It happened with J.D. Davis. It happened with Conforto. It happened with Brandon Nimmo. Now, J.D. Davis, not the same player as either one of those guys. But
Dom Smith as well.
Dom Smith, too, and I like Dom Smith. But a lot of Mets fans overrate our own guys. Now, I think sometimes people around baseball underrate our own guys. So I do think that sometimes it balances out. But I think that more often than not, it does not balance out. People are like, oh, my God, they can't let Conforto walk. And then it's like all of a sudden Conforto's hurt. He doesn't play for the season. It's like, guys, look at Conforto's body of work over 6 years. This is not a guy that you absolutely must re-sign because you think he's handsome or because he, you like his demeanor or you like the fact that he plays a really aggressive right field. Like, that's not enough to give a guy $20 million. And again, he earned $20 million. So somebody should give it to him. I don't want my team to do it. Same thing with Brandon Nimmo. I like Brandon Nimmo, but I've gotten to the point now where people are defending him so aggressively that I have said to several people this week in Twitter arguments, I was like, I hope he doesn't re-sign with the Mets and he goes to Colorado just so that it ruins your day. I have said that to people because I'm so angry. Because I'll say things like, look, Brandon Nimmo is a very, very, very good player, but he's not an elite player. I'll say things like, Brandon Nimmo is excellent. I like him on the Mets, but I don't think he's a difference maker. And people, how could you say he's not a difference maker? Brandon Nimmo plays the best center field. He made himself so much better, and everybody thought he was a fourth outfielder. But look at him now. Look what he's done. It's like, okay, that doesn't mean he's a difference maker. He's not a difference maker. He's a very, very good player who does a few things really well, who has a place on this team. But people are like, I want to pay this guy a blank check. They have the amount of people in the last 3 days that have been like, well, now the Mets have to do everything they can to re-sign Brandon Nimmo. I can't get behind. I understand that after Nimmo, there is a drop-off. You talked about this, and you're 100% right. But that doesn't mean that you need to jump all over Brandon Nimmo. And that's why I keep bringing up this Carlos Correa fantasy that I know is not going to happen, especially now that the Giants and Padres didn't get Judge. They're probably going to give Carlos Correa infinity $1 billion and just let him be their player for whatever position he wants to play. He could pitch, he could run the team, whatever. That's what they're going to try to do. But I just think that you can't invest the kind of money that Brandon Nimmo is going to command in this market. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't. And I don't want him to sign with another team because I don't want it to ruin your day, Ibby, but I do want him to sign with another team so it ruins people on Twitter's day. I do.
But based off of what you just said, and knowing that the idea, look, I get the idea of Carlos Correa, but there's been I don't think there's ever really been a clear-cut thing that would say he'd be willing to play third base. I know Xander Bogaerts and his representation have gone out and said he'd be willing to play a little bit short. He'll play second, he'll play third, things like that, so he can get the years that he wants on the deal. I think with the shift gone and a lot of teams needing a shortstop, I think Carlos Correa is going to go somewhere that needs a shortstop hitting in the middle of the lineup. I think that's what he wants to do. Now, of course, money always talks. We know that. Maybe he'd be willing. Who knows? But that's where I am with that. But based off of what you're saying, and I'm not even defending anything. I'm just asking the question. Based off of what you're saying, this isn't even me defending Nimmo. Based off of what you're saying, and knowing that it's a pipe dream, and knowing that Correa is probably not coming here, but still being adamant about Brandon Nimmo, because your biggest thing was always saying, well, I would rather check other avenues and then sure, go after Nimmo. But it seems like you have a line there. And look, the market's going to dictate with him now because a lot of teams missed out. So if you're not getting Carlos Correa, if you're not getting Xander Bogaerts, if you're not getting any of these guys, I talked about this weeks ago. If that's how you feel, then at that point, you cannot settle for Kevin Kiermaier. You cannot. No. So what? So then what? If it's not those guys, and I don't think it's going to be, if you're not re-signing my guy, that's why I want to say my guy now. My guy, Brandon Nimmo. If you're not doing that, what are you going to do?
Look, that's the thing. There's a difference between what I would do and what I think is going to happen. I think the Mets are probably going to wind up re-signing Brandon Nimmo. We've seen a lot of reports on Twitter over the last hour, 2 hours, that the Mets are in on Senga and Nimmo, and they see an avenue to get both, and they see reasons to carry both. And hell, Ibby, like I said earlier, that's going to get their payroll to damn near 300 and something, $70 million by the time they round up the bullpen and all that stuff. So I think there's an avenue for both those guys. I wouldn't do that because I think that the offense, while really good at times last year, and I know they scored a ton of runs, the offense left a lot to be desired. I think the offense needs more pop. I think the offense needs to be a little bit more right-handed. And I think the offense needs to do something a little different from what Brandon Nimmo has to offer. That's my feeling. And I just want to say this to everybody who's listening. I want to say this to everybody who is watching, because I have tweeted the same tweet, I don't know, 35, 40 times over the last couple of weeks. My issue with Brandon Nimmo is this, in a nutshell. I am going to speak it so that hopefully I will never have to tweet it again. I like Brandon Nimmo. He has turned himself into an elite center fielder. He is a very, very good on-base percentage guy. I do not think that he is an elite on-base percentage guy. I am worried about giving 6 to 7 years, $20 to $25 million, which is the ballpark that people keep talking about, for a player who's about to be 30 years old, who played one season of 150 games in his baseball career, that being last year a walk year. I am concerned about all of that. The other thing that I will say is that people were like, how could you say that his numbers on base percentage are not elite when he is, since he entered the league, and here are the stats to prove it, in the top 8 since 2016? Well, Ibby, look at the other names on that list, will you? Mike Trout, Juan Soto, Freddie Freeman, Joey Votto, Aaron Judge, Bryce Harper, Paul Goldschmidt, Yordan Alvarez, Yelich, Rendon, Bryant, Altuve, and the one that gets cut off at the bottom is Alex Bregman. All of those guys do a lot of things that Brandon Nimmo does not do. Brandon Nimmo's on-base percentage for his career is very impressive in a time in baseball where people strike out a lot, hit a lot of home runs, and people don't try to get walks. But at 385 for his career, for a guy who does not steal bases, a guy who does not have a lot of pop, and a guy who, although to his credit, he strikes out less now, has a propensity in his career to strike out a lot as well as walk a lot. To me, that is not an elite skill set when you also factor in that he has not played a ton of games over that stretch. He has only one season where he's had over 140 games played and a 400 on base percentage. All of those other really lofty 405, 410, 55 games, 90 games in a season. So to me, that's the big difference. That's my concern with Brandon Nimmo. All jokes aside, I know the Mets don't have a lot of other options, and I do think he fits this ball club, and I do think he's tough as nails, and he's easy to root for. But to me, a lot of people are overrating what he does at the dollar amount that he is going to command now that he is the best outfielder available that Aaron Judge has signed. To me, that's my problem. That's my soliloquy about Brandon Nimmo. Thank you for listening.
So, in short, everyone, John hates Brandon Nimmo. He doesn't want him back. He thinks he stinks.
Basically, yeah.
No, but I understand what you're saying. I was talking with a friend the other day, who's a Met fan also, and he was saying how he worries about the makeup or the like you were saying the bat skills and his overall profile, how that goes about over a 5, 6, 7 year period. If certain things are eliminated or things change as he ages, it turns into a rough contract. I get that. I understand that. And I think that they are being choosy in terms of who they want to go long on in terms of contract. Because if we're noticing anything outside of Francisco Lindor, who is a cornerstone building block piece, and we hope that Pete is eventually that as well. But look at all the contracts that they've given out. 2, 3 years. I think Marte was 3 with an option for a 4th. So it's like they're not giving out big deals because they want to try and find that sustainability. They want to let their farm grow so then they can pick and choose how they want to spend their money. I get that. Maybe to them, Brandon Nimmo doesn't fit that overall plan. But when you choose to spend the money the way that they have on the players that they have, in terms of how this market has played out, look, you are at the mercy of Scott Boras. That's the truth. You may not like the money that's going to have to go out to him. Look, I have been saying that I thought he was going to get $135 million. That was the number that I was at. Is that going to change now because the Giants missed out? Is that going to change because the Padres are trying to throw money? I don't know. Maybe it does. But I think that, I always thought that 135 was the number that he was going to end up around. And me personally, I don't have a problem with it because I think he fits for what this team needs in terms of the top of the lineup. I understand. I get you can move Marte, you can put McNeil. I get the different iterations of the lineup that you can have if he was to leave, but you're not replacing him with a like-minded player because I think Brandon Nimmo is better than Andrew Benintendi. I do. I think look, even though if we're picking
numbers
and choosing,
mean it's close. Numbers say it's closer than you think. Though.
It's closer than I think. But if we're going to talk about power, a guy who basically has sapped all of his power over the last 3 years, Andrew Benintendi has not done anything. So if they were closer in that sense, then yeah, maybe Andrew Benintendi is also trying to get that much money too. So if you're just trying to pinch pennies, I don't think an Andrew Benintendi replacing Nimmo to go in an outfield with Canna and Marte is better than having Brandon Nimmo out there. I think Brandon Nimmo is better. So the fact is you're at the mercy of the market and he fits because if you lose him, this team offensively is in trouble big times. I don't think they're getting the other likes of a Correa or a Bogaerts. And when it comes to a deal, to bring it up real quick from what was his name? Toby Coughlin. I think I want to say that's how you say the name, talking about Brian Reynolds over the weekend as a potential, and the ideas that he was saying, because I said that, you know, I like Brian Reynolds, but I'm not giving up the draft capital to get a player like that. As good as he is,
I wouldn't do that either. I would just sign Brandon Nimmo.
So it's like, well, his whole argument was, well, he'd be cheaper for ages 27 to 30 as opposed to Nimmo 30 to 35. It's like, I understand that. I get that wholeheartedly. But if I'm going to trade away consistently like they've been doing, if I'm going to trade away from my farm that I'm trying to build up, but if I keep on dipping into it, if I'm going to dip into it for a certain player, it's not going to be Brian Reynolds. I'm sorry. It's not. He's a good player. But if I have a like-minded player out there that's just going to cost me money, I'm going to pay that guy and then use my capital to go get somebody else to help me in a different position. I'm not going to do it when there is a certain player out there that matches, if not be better than what I'm trading all my capital away for. That's the way I feel on that. So I think where we are, I think the idea of getting a Kodai Senga for the rotation, getting Brandon Nimmo for center field, and then attacking little pieces here and there for the pen and rounding out the bench and maybe figuring out what you're going to do at DH. I think that's where this team is going to go. Whether people like it or not, I think that's where it's going to be. Could they get outpriced and say, look, if the Giants come in and say, hey, we're going to give you $175 million, then it's like, well, if he goes, then God bless you, Brandon. You got a lot of money and you're going to go play out by the bay. That's great. Good for you. That could happen. But I think that he's going to get money. I think the Mets are very well in play. It is concerning when you hear Scott Boras say that he will not give the Mets, because it's common practice for his clients. They get the highest offer, they take it. So if the Mets aren't there and someone else is, he's just going to take that offer and run. If that's the case, sucks, but so be it. But I do think that based off of where this team is, if they were to lose out on Brandon Nimmo, how everything else has gone so far, this team from an offensive perspective is in deep trouble.
You know, look, it is hard to argue with that, regardless of my feelings on Nimmo and where I'd rather see them go. Because you and I have talked, all jokes aside, about how you would take Carlos Correa and Andrew Benintendi over Brandon Nimmo if there was any indication that they would actually do that.
Could happen.
He would come
right.
here, he would play third. Rael actually agrees with you, says, come on, John, Nimmo is just hitting his stride. Give him some props. We watched the growth. Don't let another team take his best years like the Wilpons did with Wheeler. I guess that's a fair point. I love Rael, so it's a fair point as any. I just don't know what Brandon Nimmo's best years are. Objectively, for me, that's my biggest problem. And then goes on to say, plus Boras owes us Nimmo, especially after we didn't burden Ty with the QO, and then he turns around and sells him to a division rival. For me, this is as much about Boras as it is Nimmo at that point, which it's kind of funny that she said that after you said all the things about Boras. Boras is, listen, he's going to do what he does, and I don't think he's going to take it as if he owes us anything. Stevie Mack saying the way the market is going, Nimmo might be more than $27 million a year at this point, especially with a lackluster outfield market next year. And Carlos saying, that's my problem, Stevie Mack. Can't pay him that much. It's just not reasonable, not even close. And then Stevie Mack saying, Carlos, at that point, they could have just tried for Judge instead. I mean, that is really my point. If Nimmo starts to get into the territory that you don't want to go to, that's, I guess, the flip side of the argument, right? Forget about our personal feelings or my analysis of Nimmo versus yours or Rael's or anybody's. Your point about if the Mets don't get Nimmo, where do they go? They're screwed is fair. My point is, if the market gets so high for Nimmo, then just go get somebody else who's better than him for a little bit more money. Now, I don't know if his market's going to get to 27 million, but if his market gets to 27 million, well, then give me Correa for 34 or 33 or 32 or whatever. I'd rather have Correa at that number than Nimmo at the number that he's getting, if that's the case. So for me, that's where I start to split hairs on it. Look, we're going to see what happens probably in the next couple of days, honestly, because I think the Nimmo stuff and the Senga stuff is going to come to a head. So before we get out of here, let's talk about a couple of other things. Oh, wow. Breaking news as of Jeff Passan, seconds ago, outfielder Masato I'm going to butcher this name. Okay. Outfielder Yoshido, the one from Japan, is signing with the Boston Red Sox.
Hey now.
So Boston spending money again. I cannot say that name, evidently, and that was a absolute train wreck of me trying to do it. Sorry about that. Yeah, but passing bomb during the show, Red Sox in agreement with the outfielder from Japan, who we didn't even talk about because I didn't think he was on the Mets' radar, but that would have been another potential outfield pivot maybe, but now obviously not going to happen as well. So let's move on to the last couple things that we didn't really have a chance to get into. Mets make a trade. It's Brooks Raley for a minor league prospect that everybody seems to like. I know Joe DeMayo liked him a lot, but also likes the trade a lot. And look, Brooks Raley is an older guy, journeyman player, but a 2.68 ERA last year with Tampa. Plus, he's got a wipeout slider. You know, how the Mets like to build on guys who have deadly sliders. And not only is he signed for 2023, but he's got a club option for 2024, which really, really, really helps when you're trying to build out a full bullpen like the Mets have been trying to do. I also think the moves that they're making in the starting rotation with Quintana and then potentially Senga or Bassett or somebody else pushing McGill and Peterson into a bullpen position also kind of help out a little bit, Ibby. But your thoughts on that trade, 1-for-1? I know some people didn't like it because they thought that Keyshawn Askew had good stuff. But look, he's far away, and I think the Mets needed a lefty right now, and they went out and they got one. Maybe they still go get Chafin, but maybe not.
Yeah, it's a cheaper option. Maybe it's because they didn't want to spend the money on a Chafin. But look, there are big lefties that are within this division that you have to try and take care of, whether it's the Harpers or the Schwarbers of the world. And the fact that Raley in 2022 against lefties had a 155 batting average and a 483 OPS. Look, it was a career year for him, but you try to play off of those numbers and hope that he can carry it over again. We know that relievers are fickle, but the idea here is they needed a lefty badly. It's a cheaper option, sure, but it's not as if it's a cheap option in terms of like the bargain bin where you're just hoping that some guy, this isn't Chasen Shreve. This is a guy who had a good year last year. So the idea of that and maybe saving the money potentially, they could still go after Chafin potentially, but if they don't want to spend that money and use that money elsewhere, this is a good allocation of that money because, again, like I said, he had a very good 2022, albeit a career year. Hopefully it carries over into this year, but the idea of the option as well is a good thing to have. And this team needed a lefty in the pen, and they finally got one.
Yeah, look, to me, I said it a couple of years ago. I stand by it. You know, the Mets made a great deal for Aaron Loup. It paid off dividends. I said you don't re-sign Aaron Loup. Good teams find the next Aaron Loup. And what did the Mets do? Well, through their advanced scouting, through their analytics, through whatever channels you want to talk about, they turned around and they got Adam Ottavino on an undervalued deal, and he was great. Now, look, I think there's more case to be made to bring back Ottavino this year than there was to bring back Loup last year, simply because you're rebuilding an entire bullpen, and Ottavino was so good. I think Raley is that kind of player. I think he's in the Ottavino mold, the Loup mold, where you look at somebody who is just unlocking it, and maybe you can get the best out of him, even though he's a bit older. Look, the old adage in baseball is that sometimes left-handed pitchers take a while to develop, and this guy did. I think he made his major league debut in 2012 and didn't pitch again until 2020 or something like that in the major leagues. So, you know, he was definitely out of the loop a bit. But, look, great year. I don't think they gave up too much. It was a 1-for-1 swap. The Rays are always going to look for young upside guys that they don't have to pay a lot of money to. I know he had good stats and a skew, but again, the Mets need somebody who's going to help them win now. When you spend a combined $86 million in change on two 40-year-old pitchers, you're not also then going to sit there and worry about trading a left-handed bullpen arm who's
An
an
A-ball.
A-ball. That's
Yeah.
not going to be your highest concern. Stevie Mac, also echoing what I said, really has some serious break on his pitches, and that's what I was mentioning before about the slider really being there. And the Mets loving that. They got a lot out of it with Ottavino. You've seen them take, other guys who even had elite sliders, pushing it further and further the more they use them. The deal with the Boston Red Sox, by the way, is 5 years, $85 million. So it's $17 million per for the Japanese outfielder who just posted today, plus $15 million in the posting fee. So the total deal is $100 million for 5, which I don't know. Ibby, do you think that affects Brandon Nimmo's market, all jokes aside?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, I
basically
think
a $20 million a year deal.
Yeah, I think no matter what, I think the market is already there for Nimmo. The teams that are after him, they know what they're dealing with. It's more so, I think it's more so the comp of the George Springer contract. I think that's what it is. And I spoke on that prior, where I thought Springer was a lot more accomplished in terms of his resume to get that money, albeit he was 2 years older than Nimmo before he got that. But I think that's what Boras is going to push for, and we'll see if he actually gets it.
Yeah, look, I mean, it remains to be seen. Boras usually gets the most money out of his guys, or rather for his guys out of teams. And then I guess the last bit of information, unless some other breaking news comes down as we're doing this, but today was also the Rule 5 draft, and the Mets did not lose anybody in the Rule 5 draft, including Jake Magnum, who a lot of people thought they might lose, who they chose to leave unprotected. He is still in the Mets organization, so that is good for outfield depth. Obviously, the guy is a whiz with the glove, but they also selected right-handed pitcher Zach Green from the Yankees in the Rule 5 draft, and Joe DeMayo, PSL to Flushing, he posted that Green had a 3.42 ERA in 48 appearances for AAA Scranton, struck out 96 batters in 68.1 innings. So the strikeout to innings pitch ratio, very good. ERA, not filthy, but, pretty good. So
pretty good.
Listen, Rule 5 pick, rebuilding that bullpen, take a flyer on a guy like this. I see no harm, no foul there.
No, absolutely not. And like you said, when I look at things like that, I look to the, whether it's the K per 9 or whatever, maybe like when I see stuff like that, it's like, strikeouts per innings pitched, it's like that interests me. So when you have a live arm like that, that's always going to get the attention of people. So when I see that, yeah, I'm excited. We'll see if anything comes of it, but all good by me.
Yeah, and Stevie Mac jumping in saying apparently the Mets are still a possibility in on Stripling as well. Stripling's fine. I think that would be I don't know.
I think with Quintana,
I think that would be I think Stripling and Quintana are kind of the same kind of player, and I think now the Mets are looking at Bassett and Senga in that ballpark. I think Stripling's meh to me.
I like Ross Stripling had a good year last year in Toronto. I know that only because I had him in fantasy, but he had a good year, and I think if he was to be here, it would be more so for that, back end role 4-5. If not being like that, almost, I don't want to say Trevor Williams, but like, because he had a really good year last year, that being Stripling, but kind of in that ilk. But yeah, I think he's going to go elsewhere for a little bit more money. But the fact that they signed Quintana, I think that kind of takes him away from Stripling.
Yeah, and Gil Almonte jumping into the comments saying, Yoshida just signed with the Red Sox, 5 years, $85 million. That's what we were just talking about. Yeah. We had our first ever passing bomb on the show while recording during the show. So thank you for dropping that nugget in there. But because sometimes we don't catch it during the show. We try to be off our phones. But look, when you're at the trade deadline or the winter meetings, you kind of have to have the phones hot and ready. John Heyman tweeted a minute ago that the deal for Yoshida is $90 million. But since he blew that Aaron Judge thing yesterday, I don't trust anything he says. I'm going to go with Jeff Passan. Hell, I'm going to go with Gil Almonte over John Heyman because he's a damn moron lately. So
I love the fact that my Heyman tweet yesterday got a lot of run. I used that same tweet 3 different times on Heyman, and they all got fantastic run. It goes to show you the run that he's on right now.
Because everybody knows what a clown show he is, and it just is what it is. Ibby, we're approaching an hour 20, which is about as long as we like to go, even in a jam-packed episode like this. So, any final thoughts? A lot of stuff can happen between now and next week when we record again. So, where's your head at? What do you think's going to happen? What do you want to say to these people who are watching, listening, all that good stuff?
Number one, thank you to all the new listeners. If there's one thing I will say, even if you're not here live, the podcast listeners, it seems as though we've had a huge uptick over the last week. Our numbers are really climbing. Makes me very happy to see that stuff. I've been saying it to John. I don't know if it's because people are seeing us from crossover episodes with Subway to Shea, whether it's from the QBC, wherever it is. If you guys listen to us for the first time, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. We're trying our best to really grow this show. We have a lot of things on the horizon that we're excited about. So thank you for joining us on this ride. And as for our New York Metropolitans, by the time we record next week, I'm going to say that I feel confident that Kodai Senga is going to be a Met. I will not leave a comment when it comes to my main man, Brandon Nimmo, because I do not know what's going to happen. As much as I want to say he will be signed by our New York Mets, I'm going to say that I believe Kodai Senga will be a New York Met by the time we record next week.
It's all great stuff. I really have no kind of rebuttal to it, so I'll just echo some of what you said. I did host the QBC on Saturday, which is why I'm in New York this week. Thank you to everybody who came out to that. It was a blast hosting it this time. It was a blast hosting it last year. I hope that I'm asked back to do it again next year as well. It's a really great event. I really hope that you guys, get the opportunity to come out and do it. R.A. Dickey was there. He was incredible. Bartolo Colon, who I had the opportunity to interview, he was great. Of course, Hojo was also fantastic, and he's been on this show. You can go back and listen to old episodes to catch Hojo. Right before Old Timers Day, we had him on. He was interviewed by Lori Rubinson, who from WFAN, who was a guest on this show. Roger Clark, who's been a guest on this show. So many people. Jake Brown, Nelson Figueroa, Joe DeMeo, Connor Rogers. We're going to try to do some fun stuff with all them coming up soon. Gil Almonte saying, I am a podcast listener. Thanks for keeping me away from WFAN on my drives to work, which brings me to my next point. If you can't watch us live, that's all good. You can watch the broadcast as soon as we're done over on our YouTube channel, which is called Till Mets Do Us Part. Or like Gil does, you can listen to us usually the following morning. Sometimes the podcast drops really late at night, but it's hard to kind of make that happen. Courtesy of the Chop Sports Network on any platform that you get your podcast. Doesn't matter if it's Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, all of those places and more. You can find our podcast if you search Till Mets Do Us Part. Turn on notifications when you subscribe, because then you'll know, hey, they're live, I should tune in, or hey, the episode just dropped, I'll make sure I get it. Yes, Stevie Mack, always better at this than I am. Hit the like button and subscribe as well. As I'm saying it, thank you, Stevie. I finally got it. I'm with you, Ibby, as far as predictions goes. I think by the time we record next week, the Mets have Kodai Senga, and I think their rotation is absolutely stacked. Max, Verlander, Senga, Quintana, Carrasco, with guys like McGill, Peterson, and Lucchesi kind of waiting in the wings. That's a really good 8-deep rotation to have. I'm not sure on Brandon Nimmo either. I would say right now, gun to my head, Mets bring him back. But as long as my pipe dream exists, as long as Carlos Correa is not signed somewhere else, I'm just going to hold out hope that the Mets go in a different direction. Not because I don't like Brandon Nimmo, even though a lot of people think I don't like Brandon Nimmo, but because I think the Mets need a little something more out of this team going forward. So that's just what I would do. That's just how I would spend the money. That's me. That's a real photo that Ibby took in Central Park, I promise. Anyway, guys, this has been an absolute blast. Thanks for rocking in the comments. Shout out to Gil and Stevie Mack and Rael and Carlos and everybody who was here. Baseball and BBQ. So many folks really staying active in the comments. We appreciate it all. Appreciate all you guys watching, listening, all that stuff. Thank you, guys. I'm John. That's Ibby. This is Till Mets Do Us Part, and we will see you guys next week.